Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you. Thank you for being with us, for coming here. Let me cordially welcome our panelists who agreed to offer their comments to the studies, to the research done by the Institute of Public Affairs. This research and the outcomes of this research will be a starting point for our discussion today. So, a few words of introductions first. It's been a year since the historic decision of the British society supporting the EU exit, the EU withdrawal from the European Union, Brexit as we call it. The referendum took place June previous year. Around 52% of those voting supported Brexit, 48% of those voting voted against the withdrawal. And though the referendum was supposed to be non-binding consultation only, but this decision was then backed, supported by a number of decisions taken by the British Parliament, and now Brexit comes into reality. That's the topic of the news. Every day we view the developments. In spring this year, I had the pleasure to participate in the Polish-British Forum organized, the Belvedere Forum as it was called, organized in Warsaw, where Brexit was one of the dominating topics for certain, naturally. And let me refer to the panel discussion back then between two top-level politicians, Polish and British ones. One of the participants in this discussion told Brexit should not be compared to the divorce, because in divorce there are usually children who turn into some kind of orphans. Well, back then I thought, and I continue thinking that way, that this comparison with a divorce is correct in this very nature, because we are going to have post-Brexit orphans, these 3.5 million of EU citizens, EU nationals who reside in Great Britain right now, as well as 1.2 million British nationals living in the European Union. So, in my opinion, these people can be called the post-Brexit orphans, the group of people whose rights should be subject of our special care in this moment of negotiation and uncertainty. The problem of EU citizens living in Great Britain and their status specifically refers to Central Europe, specifically Poland. An estimated 1 million of Poles stay in Great Britain, but over 300,000 Romanians, over 200,000 Lithuanians, around 100,000 Slovakians. So it is Slovaks. It is a problem for our region there. So that is why the topic of our debate, the topic of our discussion in this part of Europe, how the negotiations are perceived and the future of the relations between the EU and Great Britain in the context of the rights of EU nationals living or residing in Great Britain right now. This presentation of the research that we've done is a part of a larger project run by our institute together with the Bertelsmann Foundation. The aim of this larger project is to view the reactions, interests, the perception of Brexit and major challenges related to Brexit. We intend to publish further reports on various aspects of Brexit and Brexit-related negotiations, how the interests are perceived and what the interests we have and what are the concerns of our countries. We would like to be heard in this European discussion on Brexit. So the first of the series of meetings on the topic, we started from the hottest issue, or the most important for the public, EU citizens residing in Great Britain. And at the very start, we will provide you, we will show you the outcomes of our research. Anna Piłat and Aleksander Fuksiewicz, the authors, the researchers involved in the research, in the study. And now I voice over to them. Once again, thanking you first for coming here to our session. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. I'm really grateful because, as we stress, we are not presenting a report as such. We are still working on the final report. So we will be really interested to hear your first comments. They'll be of help to us in finalizing the report. We focus on one of the three areas that are subject to negotiation right now. So our topic is the rights of EU nationals living in Great Britain and Great Britain nationals living in EU. So we will try to show our perspective in that topic. So shortly we'll start about the statistics so that we know what figures, what numbers of people specifically from our region are involved. We will provide you with the position of the EU on the topic and the position of Great Britain on the topic, and then we'll follow with the first topics, issues, problems already identified. If Brexit really happens, or when it really happens. All those figures that you can see on the screen, they come from the British Statistical Office. These are the data covering 60 major states, but these countries account for those states that produce the majority of immigrants. 8.1 million immigrants living in Great Britain. Non-EU account for the majority, 4.7 million. Around 40% of immigrants in Great Britain are EU nationals. More than half of them people from our region, CEE. EU8, as we call them, 8 countries belonging to the top 60 of our area, without Slovakia, Estonia, and Croatia. That's the list of EU8. The majority of those are Poles, nearly 1 million. Then Romania, Lithuania, Slovakia, Latvia, Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Czech Republic to close the list. In the column to the right, you can see the recalculation of the number of immigrants versus the number of British population. So not British population, I'm sorry, the local population, the population of a specific country. So in order to show the importance for the home country as regards the immigration, so we would like to show it. In Lithuania, for instance, there is a debate now on changing the constitution in order to enable immigrants to acquire second citizenship, whereas in the Czech Republic the issue is not that pressing, so the discussion not that hot. Naturally, the issue is not only about the CEE countries. After Poland, Ireland accounts for the largest number of immigrants, then Romania, and number 4 for Germany. However, the numbers for Germany are not that significant in volume. Shortly now about the EU position and the position of the United Kingdom. The EU decided, at least at the beginning, decided to suggest really broad guarantees for all based on the free movement of people, all those who arrived at Great Britain or arrived from Great Britain to other EU countries. Really broad approach. The cut-off date should be the date of the withdrawal agreement. All those arriving earlier to that date could enjoy the entirety of rights. Those arriving later, limited scope of rights. And after 5 years of residence in Great Britain, they could acquire the settled person status, the permanent residence. No documentation proving residence were needed, and all those guarantees, the rights of those people, the rights of their families, as well as remotely working people, those living in some other countries but working for a British company, all those people should be covered by those rights. And since all that is based on the EU basic right of the free movement of people, then the jurisdiction of the Court of Justice of the European Union should apply, and the European Commission should have the right to monitor the developments pre-Brexit and post-Brexit. And now the position of Great Britain. Despite this social pressure, Great Britain has not decided to guaranteeing all rights. Great Britain has prepared a completely new proposal, a part of the British immigration law, only for the EU nationals, EU citizens, which costs a lot of uncertainty as regards people living in Great Britain who actually do not know what their status is going to be at the end of the day. So these rights turned now into the subject of political debate, political negotiation. The British position offers the cut-off date that should be subject to negotiation, but should fall between March 2017, the moment when Article 50 was initiated, and March 2019, which is the actual Brexit date. As the British as the Secretary of State for Exited the EU, David Davis, says, Great Britain would like to avoid this window of opportunity when so many immigrants would arrive at Great Britain in order to secure themselves their rights. But actually, the numbers of immigrants have not increased since the referendum. Actually, the net value of immigration is pretty balanced right now, as we can read in our data.
According to the British position, the EU citizens have been divided into 3 groups. I dare say that the best situation is enjoyed by those who can prove that they have been uninterruptedly in the UK for 5 years. They can apply for so-called settled status, which is a brand new phenomenon established solely for EU nationals. However, it is based on a similar solution for non-EU nationals who have been living in the UK for more than 5 years. This is a significant step towards them. They would not have to prove that they have been covered by the national healthcare system. Settled status would allow them to enjoy full spectrum of rights, full spectrum of services, and to apply for citizenship after the total of 6 years of staying on the territory of Great Britain. These people enjoy the best situation. Cut-off date, however, results in a situation in which we are not certain about who is in this group. And let me emphasize that there is no automatic approach, even though you have been living in the United Kingdom for 5 years uninterruptedly, you don't get the status automatically. You have to prove that it was an uninterrupted stay, and this status can be denied to people who have committed a crime on the territory of the United Kingdom. And furthermore, if a person leaves Great Britain for 2 years, and then the status is lost unless you have strong ties with the United Kingdom, which is a rather blurred category for the time being. And if you have spent less than 5 years in Great Britain, you can apply for an intermediary status to fill up, so to say, what's left until you reach the 5-year period to reach the settled status. However, there are no safeguards whatsoever. What you read in British documents is that the person will apply for the settled status based on the documents binding at the moment of application, which means that the documents can actually change significantly vis-à-vis what we currently have. And last but not least, the third category of people arriving after the cut-off date who can stay in the United Kingdom temporarily without any further guarantees. Let me add two further questions related to time. The first one is grace period, which is supposed to be a simplification. A person would not have to submit the documents prior to Brexit, would have a 2-year grace period for the submittance of documents. This would make matters easier for the immigrant, him or herself, and the British administration, who would not get overloaded. And second item mentioned by Theresa May in her last week's speech would be a transition period. And the question arises, how would that fit into the settled status timeline? The Brits assume that the governing law will be the British law without any jurisdiction of the Court of Justice of the European Union. Well, as my co-researcher mentioned, there's a range of problems and issues arising. I will complement what he said, but we do hope to hear from you. Where do you assume that we can find potential causes of problems or challenges that we have not been able to identify up until now? A catalogue of problems that EU nationals faced after Brexit is by no means easy. The position of the EU is pretty clear as regards ensuring certain level of rights. The position of the United Kingdom, however, is very general in certain aspects. Many points related to the status of citizens of third countries is not defined. In fact, we don't know what their status will be after Brexit, after the grace period elapses, if they are not able to reach or to cover the 5-year period, yet wish to stay in the United Kingdom. We know that such people will definitely have to apply for temporary stay permit. We are not certain, however, whether that will be similar to what is currently applied to third countries' citizens, or in the light of the fact that settled status is reserved for EU citizens only, there will be another tailor-made permanent, temporary residence status made for them. It is not yet clear in the British position. Furthermore, we expect that other people, there was going to be certain limitations as regards access to, for instance, the job market, social security. We assume that there's definitely going to be less enjoyed by people who have the permanent leave to remain status. For instance, if there's a person who has been in the United Kingdom for 4 years and still needs 1 year to be able to apply for the settled status, will find him or herself in a period of limited rights and then will return in a way to full access to the job market, full access to all social services on equal rights with the Brits. What we are concerned with is that a very curious situation may occur. A person will have his or her rights limited for some time and then will be able to enjoy them in full after the lapse of a certain period of time. Furthermore, what is not yet specified in the British plan is the right of families to reunite. The main suggestion is to upkeep the current situation without any threshold values related to the financial condition of the family. However, we hear voices that some threshold conditions could be set after Brexit. What would that mean if there's a person living in the UK and the closest relatives are to join him or her? And let me make the caveat that it is not yet precisely defined. Such people would have to meet certain financial criteria of income. And I would just like to emphasize that there's a significant difference in the attitude and the positions of the UK and the EU. What the EU nationals can enjoy right now, i.e. the right to apply for the status of a permanent residency. We see that more and more people want to follow that path before Brexit to secure their position in a way. The problem is, however, that in line with the proposal, they would have to redo the whole thing in order to get the settled status. Permanent residency will not automatically be changed into settled status, and in this context, the source of problems lies in the fact that each member of the family applies for the status individually. Different countries provide different solutions in their jurisdictions. Sometimes the solutions apply to whole families. Here the suggestion is that each relative should apply separately, which is a cause of concern, because simply the results of the procedure may be different for different relatives or members of one family, which is a strong reservation made by the EU. However, if the person is to enjoy a temporary status of a temporary resident, means that the people may, for instance, lose their right to vote in local matters, or may never be given that status, that right, if he or she doesn't collect, so to say, enough years to enjoy the settled status. The matter, though convoluted, is very unclear for us right now. Another problem mentioned is the acknowledgement of diplomas and education degrees between the UK and the EU, and the fate of students, EU students in the United Kingdom and British students in the EU. The matters are still not regulated. We assume, however, that this may be a potential source of challenges or problems and may result in a significant crisis on the British education market. The points that we mentioned are common for all EU nationals. What differentiates the EU member states is the notion of double citizenship. For us, this topic may be a source of significant inequality in the status of some EU nationals. We assume that the situation of those who can apply for double citizenship is better than that of those who can only enjoy one citizenship. Poles can apply for double citizenship, and that's what they do. In reality, we see that vis-à-vis last year, in the first 6 months of 2017, 2 times more people applied for, more than 2 times more Poles applied for double citizenship than in the first half of 2016. So that's January to June 2016 versus January to June 2017, and the increase is more than 2 times. This clearly is a reaction to Brexit and an attempt to clarify your legal situation without waiting for the politicians to agree on some specific solutions. In other words, it's a way to become legal. However, there are, for instance, Lithuanians, also a significant group in the UK, who cannot enjoy such a privilege. They have to waive their Lithuanian citizenship and can only have one citizenship. In our opinion, this is a source of serious inequalities in the legal status of people. This is by no means related to the country where the migrants live. It depends on the law in their countries of origin, but it may differ, or it may be the differentiating point between the situation of many people from our region in the United Kingdom. Interestingly, the people from the countries of origin, like Lithuania and Slovakia, in which the percentage of migrants accounts for the most significant percentage of population in the country of origin, did not give a chance for the people to have double citizenship. Another thing that we should emphasize is that potentially after Brexit, that may generate further problems. The administration will not be ready to process such a workload of documents. The British, however, say that the system will be ready and will be able to tackle the load. It will be a reflection of the system that is currently operational for third country citizens. The current initiative says that it should be a very extensive internet-based system, and the British say that it will not crash the system of public administration or overload it. However, the doubts are voiced every now and then in the discussion. As has been mentioned by my colleague, we hear recommendations that the system should be as simple as possible. The same would apply to the system for verification of the 5-year stay in the United Kingdom. However, this matter is very imprecise for the time being. We still don't know what uninterrupted stay is. According to the EU law, uninterrupted stay means less than 6 months per year. We still don't know whether staying abroad for more than 6 years deletes, in a way, all the years that you have spent in a country up until the moment of leaving. Does that apply to the settled status in the UK? We still don't know whether the same rationale or the same method will be applied in the United Kingdom after Brexit. The notion of uninterrupted stay is vital here, definitely, because many EU nationals commute or circle around the EU, staying abroad for more than 6 months often. In our opinion, this is a crucial problem in the new deal, in the context of the new legal status. Yet nothing specific is available. Yet we don't know how that period will be counted. As Oleg said, we don't know what the cut-off date will be. Many questions arise, as you can see. So we are still waiting for more information. Already now, however, we see that these are potentially areas of concern or areas of problems for EU citizens. Thank you very much indeed. My name is Agnieszka Ładał, and I'll have the pleasure and honor to be the moderator of today's debate. My fellow colleagues from the Institute showed you what we have gathered in the region. The information was also gathered based on conversations with diplomats, officials, our colleagues and analysts from the region. It's not only Polish perspective that we are presenting, and this is exactly the approach that we want to take. Rights of EU citizens on the Isles as a common problem to the EU-27, and we want to get a good common understanding. Why is the perspective of this region different than that of Germany or Portugal? Not less important is how the British perceive it. Therefore, right now, I would like to ask for a short introduction, and my request goes to people representing very varied yet key areas which are part of the constellation. Małgorzata Kałużyńska, head of the department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Her department is responsible for Brexit from the Polish perspective. I'd like to welcome Joachim Fritz van Name from the Bertelsmann Foundation. You will show us the Western European perspective. We just want to see where the potential areas of misunderstanding might lie, or maybe there are some common denominators, maybe there are some areas in which we can speak with a common voice, as there are 7 member states of the EU. I would like to welcome Maciej Dokurnow from Five Migrants Forum. He lives in Scotland. He's a Pole on the Isles, but also a person who has contact with many migrants. Maciej will be able to tell us what the people see, feel and think. And last but not least, Emma Baines from the British Embassy in Warsaw. You will give us the perspective from the other side of the negotiation table. Thank you once again for accepting our invitation. And let me hand over to Małgorzata Kałużyńska.
What's of interest to us? There are many issues raised, but where are we? Where are we in the course of the negotiation? Because sometimes in the media we can hear yet another round, unsuccessful, failure. But where are we? What has been finalized already? What are the discussions held on? What topics are being tackled right now? The European Council wants to join the decision-taking process. There must be some deadline set for individual bodies and individual stages. And what's the position of the EU and Poland? Does Poland have any strong requests, postulates, issues which are of major importance to us? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me to this debate. Let me start from saying that we shouldn't present the issue of citizens as the problem exclusively Polish or exclusively Polish problem or exclusively regions problem. It's a problem of all EU nationals residing in Great Britain. So we have the view of 27 EU states here. Definitely, the figures, the numbers show that Poles account for the most numerous group if compared to other EU-27 countries. And we have our characteristics, our nature. It's migration, post-2004 migration. In the case of other countries, Italians, for instance, around 600,000 of Italians in Great Britain, but that immigration took place earlier on, although over the recent years, as a result of the economic crisis in Italy, more citizens from the south decided to move to Great Britain. But that's a negotiation problem for the entire European Union, and as such, it's been included in the EU position. Naturally, there are states which can have some different priorities in those negotiations. Some focus more on citizens, others focus more on trade, yet other countries focus more on budgetary issues, because the relations with EU may differ state by state. So some states may have very strong economic ties with Great Britain without having that many migrants there. But the EU mandate is based on those on different pillars, including the issue of the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. And solving those issues is interrelated, so we cannot solve the issue of trade, commerce, or financial settlements without solving the topic of civil rights. Or we cannot move forward to discussing future relations without solving the pure exit topics. So each country has interests in order to progress with negotiations in all individual areas. Where are we? A lot of new things. The 4th negotiation round has just closed, and it took part after the Friday speech of Theresa May, and this Friday speech really impacted the negotiation, gave pace, gave dynamics to the negotiation, the whole of them, not only the topic of citizens' rights. So really positive atmosphere after this 4th round. Before coming here, I only could get some short information after the joint conference of Michel Barnier and David Davis. Will be briefed after negotiation round 4 only later on today in the evening. But at this press conference of Michel Barnier and David Davis, we can immediately see that progress has been made as regards citizen rights. So the direct impact of the withdrawal agreement has been assured. So EU citizens will have the right to refer to the withdrawal agreement before the British courts. That's the achievement, because the approach to that issue was different earlier on. Progress has been made in various areas as well. One of the areas mentioned by you is the administrative procedure, and the British party suggested to meet somewhere on the playing ground. Michel Barnier said the British party agreed that citizens with the permanent residence right would not need to reapply. That's what we've heard at the press conference. We hope we'll get the confirmation of that later during the day. This table showing the differences between the EU position and Great Britain's position is going to be available in the afternoon. That's public information, where we have the green fields and the red fields. They will be clearly visible and available to the general public. But after this press conference, we can immediately see that there's some progress has been made as regards the citizens' rights, and the parties get closer to the compromise. In the negotiations, we have this gradual approach. We wish to solve some issues in the first negotiation phase, then we'll move forward to the next stage. Moving to next stages, the decision of moving to next stages is taken by the European Council, so it's a political decision. The chief negotiator has the task of informing EU-27 on the sufficient progress, allowing proceeding to the next stage. Earlier on, before the October European Council summit, there were plans to have yet another negotiation round, so round number 5. We don't know. We will see what the calendar is going to look like. But the European Council should once take a decision on the sufficient progress made when we move forward to the next stage. There are issues still unsolved. During round 4, those unsolved issues were tackled as well. 2 important topics were the issue of exporting benefits and family uniting issues. So these 2 topics still for discussion. Everything depends on yet another next negotiation round. Polish and EU positions are aligned. If they were not aligned, we could not start the negotiation because Poland wouldn't agree to the negotiation guidelines. However, we agreed to with those guidelines. We offered our consent there. All eyes are turned on Poland because we have the largest number of citizens living in Great Britain. So many member states consider that if we agree to the compromise, this compromise is going to be positive to the rest of EU citizens as well. That's because of the volumes of Poles living in Great Britain. But there was some specificity about Polish citizens included in the negotiations positions. And one of the topics that I can offer or quote here are people, citizens who at the point of exit still do not have those 5 years of residence on their account. We wanted the EU position to include the possibility of this extra time offered to these particular people, to offer them some time to win this extra time that they still miss. They shouldn't be kind of cut off immediately. They should get some interim period to collect the extra months, years that they miss. So that's one of the issues included in the EU position. Thank you very much. Now to the other side, a question to Emma Baines. From your position, what does it look like? Well, the question that we all wish to ask, why hasn't Great Britain agreed unilaterally to accept the EU nationals' rights? What are the arguments? of importance to British government, and what are the core issues for Great Britain in the course of negotiation? What would you consider as the key issues, key topics, key areas? We know what the EU is mainly interested in as regards the citizen rights, but the British government has its interests too. Very much. Thank you very much for the questions. I'll speak in English. But at the beginning, I just wanted to say something in Polish. I just a Polish start. However, I'll switch into English as the issues are fairly complicated.
For your questions, I think first of all there were a few things mentioned in the presentation that I wanted to respond to, and then I will respond to your question. I think. In fact, maybe I will start with saying that, in fact, the UK has unilaterally said that they will guarantee the rights of EU citizens in the UK. The Prime Minister mentioned that in her speech in Florence on Friday, and the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, was in Poland yesterday, and she gave an interview in the newspaper Rzeczpospolita, where she also said that we will guarantee the rights of EU citizens in the UK. And the rights that we're guaranteeing is that EU citizens in the UK will have the same rights as British citizens in the UK. I think there are still some areas for agreement, as Director Kałużyńska mentioned, around some technical issues, but in terms of, people's individual rights, they will have the same rights as British citizens have in the UK. So I think that's the first thing that it's important to say. We've also, as Director Kałużyńska mentioned, we have agreed now that we will be putting the withdrawal agreement into UK law, writing it into UK law, which means that those rights are guaranteed not to change. There's not going to be some kind of future change in British law that will mean that people's rights will change over time. We're guaranteeing that those rights are going to remain in place. Whatever is finally agreed is going to remain in place, and people will be able to go to the UK courts if they feel that their rights are not being respected. You also mentioned that it's not clear whether people who have temporary status will have different rights. That's not the case. People who have temporary status will have the same rights. It's just in order to give people the opportunity who are already in the UK before the cut-off date to get up to that 5-year point. So that temporary status is not going to mean that you have a different access to the labour market or different access to benefits or anything like that. They will have the same full access to services, benefits, healthcare as other EU citizens in the UK and as UK citizens. An area where disagreement remains that Director Kałużyńska mentioned is around the rights of future family members. And here what the UK position is once again that once the UK has left the EU, people remaining in the UK will have the same rights as UK citizens. And there are a lot of UK citizens who have family members in non-EU countries, and we have particular rules, migration rules, and those migration rules will apply. It's not clear entirely yet whether the migration rules will be exactly the same, but what we're looking at is a situation, we want to ensure there's a situation where everyone's right in the UK is the same, and on future family members, that's an area that can be a bit complicated because there are lots of UK citizens who have family members around the world, and we want to ensure that UK citizens and EU citizens have the same right to bring their families to the UK under the same rules and regulations. Another issue that you mentioned was around students studying in the UK, and it's already clear that anyone who's started a course before the cut-off date will be able to finish the course on the same basis as they've currently begun the course, and they will also be able to stay for the 5 years. So they'll have that grace period as well to stay for the 5 years if they want to remain, following on from that. So I think What's important to stress is, as the Prime Minister said and as the Home Secretary said, we are happy that people from all over the EU live in the UK. We want people to remain in the UK if that's what they want to do. We are going to guarantee that people's rights are the same as UK citizens' rights in the UK. Obviously, there are some areas for negotiation. We're leaving the EU, so we're leaving the jurisdiction of the European Courts of Justice, and we have to come to a negotiated compromise solution about how to deal with that. But we think that our courts will guarantee people's rights. Our courts regularly make decisions on immigration issues that are not really what the Home Office or the government wanted. So we don't have concerns that that's not going to guarantee people's rights going on into the future. In terms of your questions about what the important questions for the UK in terms of UK citizens living in other European countries, I think our priorities have been around, I mean, there have been similar priorities on both sides. So our priorities have been around ensuring that people will continue to have the right to reside and work in the countries where they live, ensuring that they'll continue to have access to healthcare and benefits, and also ensuring that people who are frontier workers, so people who maybe live in France and work in Switzerland every day, will be able to cross those borders without any problems and continue to have their lives as they have them currently. And that is our objective in this negotiation. So I think the news from the press conference today is very positive. We feel that we have made a lot of progress on the discussion around citizens' rights. And so what we would really like is for the conversation to move on as soon as possible with the European Union to start talking about the future relationship, because we're very aware that time is moving by quickly, and there are a lot of other issues that we need to discuss in order to determine the shape of our future relationship. And we think that it's in the advantages of both sides to reach an agreement well in advance of the 30th of March 2019, so that we can ensure that we leave in a smooth and orderly way, in a way that has the least bad impacts for both the EU and the UK. And I think I was also asked a question previously about what would happen if there's no agreement.
This for the second round of
Okay,
questions. So I will come back to that. That is a negative scenario. So let's first concentrate on other issues. Thank you. Tak, to wracając teraz z powrotem do... We now return to the EU itself and the EU-27. We know the perspective of the region. Now let me hand over to Joachim. What's the German perspective? It may be similar to the perspective of other member states, more to the west from Poland, from our region. A short question to you, sir. When we talk about Brexit in Germany, what pops up? Because here Brexit is mostly about citizens' rights. Is it the same in Germany? What's the German approach to the topic of citizens' rights of EU nationals in the UK, faced with the fact that the Germans are still very numerous on the Isles? What's emphasized in the British media discourse? Is it a topic that the media, the experts, the government talk about? As we know, you're going to have a new government soon. Will that be on the agenda of the new government? Why yes, why no? What's the approach, in a nutshell, in the non-region countries?
Thank you very much. Unlike my two predecessors here on the panel, I'm not in an official role. Yes? So my role is being a director for European affairs at a private foundation. Yeah. So I can speak a bit more freely, I hope so. I think in Germany, and your question about the next German government is, the answer is quickly done. Yeah. It won't be preoccupied by this question, quite simply because, as you said, the European Commission has a full mandate, yeah, and they have to negotiate, and when it comes to public opinion and to public discussion in Germany, citizens' rights are of importance, but perhaps side by side with other arguments and other questions on how will we cooperate inside pan-European companies with the Brits. What will happen to the investment on the Isles? Will that become more complicated? And then, of course, there is one precise question which interests not only the Germans, but foremost the Germans, is what will happen to the banking sector once the Brexit is fulfilled and done. Of course, Frankfurt is keen to have some of the highly paid posts which are now in the city of London, and Paris too, and hear voices from the Netherlands and from Dublin, yeah, that they might be interested too. That depends, of course, on the decision made by private companies, yeah, but of course there will be an impact. I think, first of all, the most important sentence which all Germans who are interested in Brexit have in the ear is the echo Wolfgang Schäuble gave to Theresa May. Yeah. When she said Brexit means Brexit, his answer was Brexit means Brexit. I think that's the quite legalistic and quite politically clear-cut answer from an eminent German politician, and everybody shares that in Germany. Second argument is heard from politicians as well as from commentators: no cherry-picking, please. Yeah. And the please is perhaps now a little bit louder than 6 months ago, yeah, when the confrontation was quite distinct and hard, yeah. And there are, as mentioned by Anna, lots of blurred categories and lots of uncertainties. For a long time of that 1 year period we are in now, the situation reminded me very much the well-known from last century headline of the London Times, fog upon Channel, the continent cut off. Yeah. Fog upon Channel, yeah, all certainties cut off. Yeah. And happily enough, I would say there is a dynamic coming in from Theresa May by the Florence speech, yeah, which means that we have now perhaps less uncertainties, but still enough. And I think that is the situation and the mood I hear in Germany and I feel in Germany. Yeah. So no cherry picking, Brexit means Brexit, but please try to be, you said that, to do it in a smooth and orderly way. We are not interested in stupid confrontations, but we are not interested also in any kind of cherry picking.
Bardzo dziękuję. No to przenieśmy się z Very much indeed. Let's get back to the Isles again. What about those who are concerned, who practically are going to feel it on their own skins? Matti, what is it like? To what extent do these topics impact the general moods among Poles in the UK? Which of the topics are particularly important for them? Can you actually sense any atmosphere of anxiety? Do people want to come back? Some people, some time ago we heard that the net migration is more or less what it was before, so there is no fluctuation. However, what's the local perspective on it? We heard that there were some expressions of resentment towards migrants around the time when the referendum was held. Apart from the legal uncertainty, can you actually feel that you're not wanted here? is it a thing of the past? Was it a thing of the past, or was it rather a media hype? And give us, please, the local perspective. Well, I will answer your question in the language used by my four speakers, so do forgive me.
I think that word uncertainty is the one that we hear most from all people coming to Five Migrants Forum. I can also speak freely because I represent third sector organization, a charity that very much helps and represents people from across all different European nations who decided to make Fife and Scotland their home, and until very recently felt very much secure and at home where we were. I will later answer the question about the feeling of the feelings around the atmosphere after the Brexit referendum. One thing that I would say right now is that we are certainly lucky in Scotland because the atmosphere is very different to what it is down south. However, going back to the whole kind of Brexit and the rights of EU citizens at the moment, well, there is a lot of chaos there and a lot of uncertainty, as I mentioned. We still don't know the details of the offer. People on daily basis come and see us at Five Migrants Forum and various other forums and organizations, and they simply don't know what's going to happen when it comes to the point where Britain actually leaves the European Union. Today, around the same time, as they've probably finished by now, my colleagues from Five Migrants Forum are giving evidence to the Culture, Europe and External Relations Committee of the Scottish Parliament on the very topic, talking about the impact that Brexit has on EU nationals in Scotland in this case. I'm really pleased to hear about declarations from the British government in terms of giving full rights to EU citizens in the UK. Well, that's the first time I heard a positive message ever since the referendum. I have to say that so far it's been really tough for all of us EU nationals in the UK. I also have to say that that doesn't answer all the questions that we have, and it doesn't answer all the questions that people come with, because we don't know what the process exactly will look like, how complicated it will be. Referring to some of the processes and some of the extent of paperwork and bureaucracy involved, I will only give my own example, where back in 2005, both me and my wife applied for the residency document. My wife received her document relatively quickly. Well, 12 years later, I'm still waiting for a response to my application. I obviously got lost. I was probably one of the lucky ones because at least my passport was returned in time. So these are technicalities. However, they are very important to us as well. We still don't know what will be the cost of applying for the settled status or whatever other form this recognition of our rights will bring. But I think the key that we would like to address, and the key expectation from EU nationals in the UK, is that we simply don't want to be treated as the second category citizens. We have experienced ever since 2004 exactly the same treatment of as other citizens living in the UK, with maybe one exception, because for a few years we were the A8 nationals, and even that caused few problems where, you know, across two different local authorities, legal issues and law was interpreted in a very different way. So under the same law, in one local authority, people were granted certain benefits or housing, while in another local authority, they were refused the same rights, but this was the period of time where accession 8 countries' nationals were treated differently. Well, ever since we have been treated the same as everybody else, we have obviously valued that, and we very much hope, and I think we will stop nothing short from demanding that we are treated exactly the same. There is a lot of worry around EU national also in terms of their families abroad. This topic was mentioned earlier. It's quite common amongst the migrant community, and particularly Polish community, that while their parents are working in another country, well, in the UK in this case, obviously, their children are still in Poland. So the question is, what will happen to those children? Will they be easily allowed to join their parents, or will there be a complicated process? Well, certainly at the moment, we have on daily basis people coming to Five Migrants Forum with those questions and those worries. Some of them, I have to say, they've taken the Leave campaign slogan quite literally, and they are planning to leave. We have seen an increased number of people coming to our offices with their concerns about instability, about their concerns of being treated differently than other people. And they are planning to leave and go to their countries. This obviously will have massive economical impact on the local economy. It will have massive impact on our National Health Service. I spoke to a friend of mine who went through a serious operation just 2 weeks ago in hospital. Out of 6 members of staff in that hospital, 5 were from the EU countries, and all 5 of them are living. They are not thinking about living, they are actually living. In terms of harassment and atmosphere and attitudes toward EU nationals after the referendum, I have to say, as I mentioned earlier, we are lucky in Scotland because the atmosphere in Scotland is very different. Shortly after the referendum, the Scottish government made a clear statement that migrants make vital contribution to the Scottish economy, that migrants are still welcome in Scotland, and that they can treat Scotland as their home. From my own as well as Five Migrants Forum clients' experience, I can say that this message has been very reassuring. It is very important for us, and equally the attitude of the local Scottish community towards EU nationals and Polish people amongst them is very friendly, welcoming and positive. I think that's the very reason why we didn't experience the increase in hate crime after the EU referendum in Scotland that could be observed down south, because our politicians from across all parties that are represented in the Scottish Parliament, regardless whether it's Scottish National Party, Labour Party, or the Conservatives or the Liberal Democrats, they have all been speaking very positively and they've been very supportive to the whole idea of immigration and migrants, while unfortunately down south the politicians have been demonizing migrants and fueling the anti-migration and anti-migrants attitudes. So I think we can very much attribute this lack of incidents in Scotland to the language that our politicians in Scotland have taken on, and equally we should and we will and we do blame politicians down south for what has been happening there, because it's that political discussion that we could all observe, that we all had to listen to, had impacted on the wider attitude towards immigrants and EU nationals.
Thank you. Ms. Baines, would you like to react and also answer the question that you already mentioned, what if?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to react. I think there are a couple of things that I want to say in response to what you've just said, Maciej. First of all, I think, it's not a new position from our side that the government's been very clear that we want people to stay in the UK and continue their lives, because the PM mentioned that in her Lancaster House speech just at the beginning of the Brexit process when we triggered Article 50. I think we are aware as a government that we need to do more outreach about what the new system is going to look like. And that's why we as an embassy are working together with colleagues in London to organise some events for the Polish diaspora. And the first event is going to happen on the 5th of October in London, but we want to do some more events going forwards in other parts of the UK. And as part of that event, we want to talk about not only any things that are concerning the Polish community in the UK. We also want to have a little bit of a discussion about what the new system is going to look like in terms of registering for settled status. So there is going to be a bit of a consultation process about how that works, but I want to say it's not going to be the same as the current process for applying for permanent residence. It's going to be an online process. This was mentioned at the beginning in the presentation. We want to make it as streamlined as possible. We want to ensure that people don't necessarily have to have loads of documents showing that they've paid tax for the last 5 years. We're hoping to have a process whereby we can access people's tax records so they don't have to prove it. We just have the information from the Department for Work and Pensions so we can see that people have been resident in the UK for 5 years. And the other issue that you raised was cost. We don't know yet precisely what the cost will be, but we do know that, once again, it's not going to be something in the region of a settlement visa for someone coming from outside the EU. It's going to be more like the kind of cost associated with getting a UK passport. That's the kind of region of cost that we're talking about. I think it's absolutely clear that we don't want anyone to feel that they're being treated as a second-class citizen. We want to give people the same rights as UK citizens in the UK. You mentioned hate crime, and there was, unfortunately, a spike in hate crime following the referendum. And the government very quickly put together a hate crime action plan and responded to that. We reached out to communities. We made it very clear that hate crime is wrong against any community. And in fact, now the statistics have gone back down again. So that spike happened, but there's been quite a lot of action from the government side to combat it. And I'm happy to hear that in Scotland that wasn't so much of a problem. In terms of your question about what happens if there's no agreement, as the Home Secretary said in her interview in Rzeczpospolita yesterday, if there's no agreement, that's going to have a big impact in terms of our economic relationship with the EU and lots of other cooperation that we have with the EU. But on citizens' rights, we don't expect that that will make any difference. We are guaranteeing that EU citizens in the UK will be able to have the same rights as UK citizens. So if we leave the EU with no agreement, that doesn't make a difference to the offer that we have on citizens' rights.
Thank you very much. Pani dyrektor, z pani strony reakcja I to samo pytanie. Co jeśli...
It's about you. What if we cannot reach an agreement? Thank you very much indeed. Well, for some time now, we have been informing our British counterparts about the need for communication, the need to reach out to EU nationals, to Poles in the UK. We are emphasizing that just presenting your negotiation position is not enough. The British government needs to undertake a range of communication-related initiatives about the practicalities of the new system. The very negotiation agreements are strongly based on simplification of procedures. This is a bulk of the EU's position, making procedures simpler in comparison with the procedures that are currently applied when applying for a permanent residency or permanent stay in the UK. What matters, however, are the details. The devil sticks in details. So we would need to look at the new questionnaire, the new system. That's something that is still unknown to us. However, we are thinking of introducing some additional safeguards if it turns out that the system is ineffective, and in the grace period the system is simply going to be overloaded and will not process all the applications. So we will see what happens if that risk materializes.
Well, we need to remember that the EU position and the Great Britain's position, they have this basic major difference. What's the mutuality, the understanding of the word mutuality? The UK position understands mutuality towards the British citizens, whereas the EU counterparty compares the guarantees and the EU nationals' right with the rights that will be granted to UK citizens in EU. We want them to have exactly the same rights and EU citizens in Great Britain. British citizens, compared with EU law, they have slightly limited rights in certain areas. So this mutuality under EU position refers to the EU legislation and the situation of UK citizens in EU-27. So in certain areas, like uniting families, there is still some room for discussion that results from the difference in approach. What will happen? There is no agreement. Well, we need to notice that last Friday's speech of Theresa May didn't mention this famous declaration that no agreement is better than bad agreement, poor agreement. I understand that the British aims at having the agreement with the EU equally strongly as EU wishes to have this agreement. That also refers to future relations between the parties. If there were no agreement, well, as regards the citizen rights, people's rights, the situation is not going to be bad. Because the Great Britain kind of transfers the EU rights into its legal system, into its legislation. So we'll have the legislations and safeguards there. They will not be as perfect, as big as they would be as a result of having the exit, the withdrawal agreement. Because then the British counterparty would have the right to change the rights, the laws, and it would transfer it based on the understanding of mutuality versus EU citizens' rights. Back to the Isles, Maciej, what's of special importance from your perspective? We stress that EU needs to exert pressure on certain areas. What are the areas that you would identify as those core? What's key for you, citizens living in Great Britain? What's a must? What's an absolute necessity? 1, 2, 3 topics.
A couple of things that Emma said. I mean, I still remember the vote in the UK Parliament for the amendment that was proposing to guarantee the rights of the EU nationals in the UK. And I remember the Conservative Party, together with the Labour Party, and even Daniel Kawczynski, who was originally Polish, now British Conservative MP, voting against guaranteeing rights of EU citizens in the UK. So I think it's important to remember that there's been that argument ever since the referendum, and we have very much failed as the bargaining chips in those negotiations between the UK and the EU, and it's just not the way that we as human beings should be treated. On the other issue, you mentioned, Emma, as well that there will be a fee for the process of getting settled status, and it's likely to be in the region of the passport fee. Well, at the moment, if I applied for the UK passport, that would cost me over £1,000. It's just for myself. So if it's a family of three, that's £3,000. No, it's £80 for UK citizens applying for a passport.
It will be the same as for a UK citizen.
Right. Well, okay, that sounds better because there has obviously been different figures in the press, and I think
Not the same, but in that region.
Yeah. Well. It does. It's gonna make a big difference to people, whatever the figure is, because I mean, obviously, things in the region of £1,000 are not only reasonable, but they are also unjustified. Because if we are going to have very simplified process of applying for it, that means that not a lot of work is going to be going into actually processing all those applications. Going back to the question. I would say, as I said before, the main point and the most important element for all EU nationals, and particularly Polish people in the UK, is to ensure that our rights are guaranteed to that extent that we have exactly the same rights as people that we live beside and we work with and that we meet in our daily life. We have made vital contributions to the UK economy, our local communities, and I can't possibly imagine being treated differently to other people. Again, from my own experience, I arrived in the UK prior to Poland joining European Union, so I know what it feels like being an outsider inside. I know what it's like being treated differently. I also know the fears of our children who are there in the UK. Very often they were born in the UK. They speak Polish as their heritage language, but it's English that is their first language. And even those children, listening to all those discussions, they feel very uncertain and very insecure. You couldn't possibly imagine an 8-year-old, and that's my son's age, who only knows Poland as their holiday destination, hearing from people from the television, from the media, that he may suddenly be sent to a country that, as I say, he loves it as a holiday destination, but he doesn't really know the educational system or what it would be like to be sent there. So I think that level of guarantee is the level of guarantee that we need, that we are going to be treated exactly the same. And mentioning any application process, mentioning any fees that the local people wouldn't have to pay, that already differentiates us in comparison to our neighbours. What I would also like to say is that we have to realise that the whole Brexit for us EU nationals is a double-sided sword, really, because not only are we affected by the removal of EU guaranteed rights, not only are we part of this negotiations or bargaining, as you could say, but we will also be affected in the same way as any other UK citizen is going to be affected by Brexit. So as the value of the pound drops, that affects our own purse as well. And I could very much see this traveling to Poland today. Also, as our economy starts feeling the effect of Brexit, this will very much be felt by us in our household, in our local economies. As our soft fruit stop being picked by EU migrants who come there for seasonal work, and their status is going to be affected very much by all those negotiations, and their rights, their situation has not quite yet been guaranteed. Well, we will all be affected by the rising prices of those as well. So all the damage that is being done to the economy, farming, food processing, tourism industries, etc., this will affect the UK nationals as well as EU nationals living in the UK. So we will get it from both sides in a way. And I think certainly the priority is that we would like to come back to what the initial position of the EU in these negotiations was, and we would very much like the full guarantee of our rights at exactly the same level as UK citizens.
Thank you. Before I ask you to ask questions, I would like to come back to Joachim, asking a question that is actually a little bit more general than our discussion here, but quite important for us here in the region, about a Franco-German cooperation, also in the respect of Brexit, because we only hear now the French president yesterday, or the Franco-German engine should reform European Union. How far in the matter of Brexit you feel this cooperation, or there is a bad and a good guy in this Franco-German engine towards the British government? Would you comment as an expert observing this negotiations and of course the political discussions between two countries? You are an expert on the French policy as well. So how far you would say Brexit is an issue for the Franco-German talks and upcoming, of course, talks, because with the new German government and the French president?
Well, in private, many German politicians who are clearly full-heartedly pro-European said when they learned about the Brexit referendum, oh, fortunately enough, this happens now, because now we can move ahead. Or for them, British politics were in the past quite often first promising and then hindering the advancement of European Union. And this has, of course, a kind of echo on the French side. The story might be a little bit more complicated when you go deeper into history. I have on my bookshelves a book from England, by the way, 1,000 Years War, meaning between the Brits and the French, not between the Germans and the French. We have a couple of decades where, unfortunately enough, we waged war against each other. But on the other side, it started with Richard Lionheart, and it didn't end up with Charles de Gaulle. So the tension between the Brits and the French in history go much deeper. And what surprised me often in the public opinion in Germany, that the perception of the French was, oh, the French are so difficult, and they are so hard to understand why they do that. The Brits are much easier to understand, and I always said, oh, please be careful here. The more romantic side, and that's my feeling, and our children studied in United Kingdom, and our daughter still lives there for 12 years, is that there is in the public debate particularly in England, to be correct, a lot of romanticism. And this is not the pragmatic aisles, which are common idea in Germany. And the French, I think, they have a little bit like the pro-European Germans, for the time being, the same feeling. Brexit happens, now we can move ahead. Problem for them that they couldn't move ahead June 2016, yeah, because there was a lame duck as a president and a completely blocked situation in domestic politics, and this has changed. And what I find very remarkable with the new president, Emmanuel Macron, is how he ended his 1 hour and a half speech in the Sorbonne with a remark towards the United Kingdom. The key passage was, of course, an invitation going to the German partner, join me on these and these issues. But at the end, there was a kind of shadow of a doubt suddenly whether he couldn't imagine Britain staying inside the European Union. So the new tone in Paris is perhaps much more interesting than the situation we have in Germany, where you have on the one side some regrets. Oh, we can understand the Brits much better than the French, meaning we speak more often English than French. Yeah? And on the other hand, the very convinced pro-Europeans who lived through in the past quite often situations where they said, no, the Brits don't play by the rules, and they are always the exception, and they stop us from moving ahead. And I would say that in the settlement David Cameron concluded with the European Union, where he said never again in an official document ever closer union, is one of the proofs for my thesis. I would say the moment is now there that once we have a new government, we will see in a very different way. It won't be Mitterrand and Kohl hand in hand, or Adenauer and de Gaulle in the Cathedral of Reims. No, this kind of symbolic won't work anymore between the two, but it will be a kind of alliance in the alliance, meaning you can join us. We are decided to move ahead. You can join us, you can follow us, but we won't wait for anybody else, neither for the Brits nor for anybody else.
Serdecznie dziękuję. Mamy jeszcze trochę czasu.
Very much. We still have some time, so please feel free to offer comments, to ask questions, to suggest any other topics in our report that is supposed to explain the situation in the region to colleagues from other countries. So if you have any suggestions of topics that we should include in our report, feel free. Questions to our panelists as well. Please introduce yourself and then a question. Good afternoon. Przemysław Biskup, Polish Institute of International Affairs. 2 comments, one question from me. Comments to the presentation. Well, you mentioned that the second numerous group in Great Britain are the Irish. Maybe they should be excluded from the research, they should be a group with a special status, because as we know, the British government is thinking about keeping the common travel area. So the problems, characteristics for other EU nationals will not be the problems of the Irish. And another comment plus a question: how have you followed the work on the EU Withdrawal Act? It clearly states that the withdrawal date in the British law is in no way related with the treaty date. So what's your opinion on that issue? And my actual question to the panel, to Madam Kałużyńska and Madam Baines, I would like to hear more details. Please be more elaborate on the following issue, because it seems to me that I heard some difference in your presentations, in your comments, and I would like to make sure whether this difference exists or not. Madam Director, Madam Kałużyńska mentioned about this direct impact of the withdrawal agreement on the British law. So is it going to be a direct impact, direct effect, or is it a transposition of this agreement into the British law by means of the new act of law, by means of the new law? I would be interested in learning that. Thank you.
Well, I'm here to collect the questions and then I'll pass on to the panelists. So maybe I'll give the floor to the panelists.
Will be that the exit agreement will be translated into UK law, but obviously there's been a negotiation process this week, so as Director Kałużyńska says, we haven't yet been briefed on the outcome of the negotiations and the detail, but that was my understanding from the PM's speech. But then it will have effect in UK law, effectively. Yeah.
Absolutely, but your position would be that, your, let's say, intuitive position would be that there will be a UK Act of Parliament that would translate that agreement into UK law.
Yes, because that's
Perfect.
what the PM said in her speech.
Okay.
Know the details of the fourth round of negotiation yet. I know what Michel Barnier said, that the UK agreed to have direct impact and direct effect, and it's very important to ensure legal certainty for the citizens, so people will be able to refer to the Withdrawal Act directly in British courts. That's what we know based on his intervention during the press conference. What the legal solution was adopted, I don't know yet. Allow me to refer back to your first comment. We included the Irish only for statistical purposes. As was mentioned, our study was based on the perspective of the region. Therefore, we are focusing on the situations of the CEE states. So the Irish obviously are not part of the study, and we are obviously aware of the fact that they enjoy a different status, or their situation is different. As for the cut-off date, the range that we quoted stems from the British position presented to the EU. However, it's hard to imagine that there might be any other cut-off date than the date of Brexit, because the EU will not agree. The date will simply result from the negotiations, but I dare say that the EU won't agree to anything different. The EEP agreed, emphasized that they will not agree to any other date. If I may provide you with a replica, well, that depends whether there's going to be an agreement or not. But in the said act, in the said draft, at the current stage, we read about the possibility of a different date than the date in the treaty, and what's more, it's possible to have different dates, different timeline for different parts of the British legal order. Thank you very much. Do we have any other comments, questions? Well, I would definitely like to return to the question that I posed at the beginning before we part. Fourth round of negotiations. What's next? Are there any fixed deadlines? Do you know what will happen in a week? Will we have the fifth round, or maybe the position of the European Commission, the European Council? Are there any any landmarks ahead of us? Any turning points? What's ahead of us in a nutshell? What are we to expect in the coming days, weeks, so that we are up to date as for the schedule for the future? Well, before the October Council, there should be one further session of negotiations, but I don't know the dates. I know that the fourth round was delayed by 1 week. I heard about the 9th of October as a potential date for the fifth session of negotiations, but I have no confirmation of that. I do assume that such a round is possible. The question is whether the the chief negotiator will come to the conclusion that enough has been achieved to present some final conclusions during the October Council. Maybe some interim solution will be proposed. However, I'd like to emphasize that it's too early to talk about it right now.
UK government side, we feel optimistic that there's been good progress in the negotiations so far, and we would like to get agreement in October to begin negotiations on the second phase, so to start talking about the future relationship. So that's our objective in the negotiation process.
Dziękuję. Znowu patrzę na Państwa.
Much. I'm looking at you, ladies and gentlemen. I see a hand raised. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you very much for your very valuable remarks. We'll definitely include them in the final version of our report. Thank you very much, because it was not all clear in the documents that were available to us. Therefore, I'm particularly thankful to Ms. Baines. And my question goes to you, Madam. After the last round of negotiations, do we know anything more about voting rights? We have not touched upon this notion, but my question is that a closed chapter already? And referring back to the people who will be waiting for the settled status, what about them? Has that been agreed upon or not, or is it still under discussion? Before I move on to hand over the mic to Emma, I had a similar question to Matti, or the political and social engagement of migrants on the Isles. That's a topic that we have talked about many times. So my question is, to what extent did Brexit motivate people, or maybe it was a source of discouragement from engaging in social and political life? At the Institute, we often say that social and political engagement is a litmus test for integration. It's a symbol of being mature, and a statement, this is my place, I'm well integrated, I'm integrated enough, I not only vote, but I run in the elections. So do you see any differences here? Can Brexit be a stimulus, a trigger to fight for something in a positive sense, or maybe quite on the contrary? First, however, let me hand over to you.
That EU citizens should have the right to stand in local elections and to vote in local elections. But after the last round of negotiation, the EU position was that it didn't. Basically, the EU did not say that UK citizens would be allowed to do the same in the EU. So that area is still under negotiation. But our position is that the EU citizens in the UK should be able to stand and vote in local elections.
Well, this is a very interesting question and very interesting topic. I mean, I agree with what you said, that it is the way to measure how we integrate in the local community by the fact whether we actually engage in the civic and political life of our local community. I can only say from Scottish perspective, because this is, you know, the devolved area there is the area where I live, and I'm very proud to say that as an EU national, that now we have the first EU national that is actually holding an elected position as the Provost of Glasgow. Who is a Swedish national and has been elected in the recent elections. In terms of the Polish community, in the last local elections in Scotland, I believe we had 4 or 5 Polish nationals who were standing in the local elections across different local authorities in Scotland. Unfortunately, on this occasion, none of them has been elected, but I think this shows that certainly there is a growing interest in being involved in what matters for the local community. And there has been a number of meetings and number of events organized by different organizations where we were talking about it and we were explaining, you know, it's all about the local issues. It's all about small issues, small local issues, and small local politics, rather than big European or even UK affairs. I think that's where this engagement starts for people, and that's maybe why within the migrant community, and specifically within the Polish community, there is still a need for further integration. People still need to be more aware of those local issues, and that is very much about what that particular small local community needs and expects. One thing that I would also like to add at the end, I mean, obviously it would be great disadvantage and great disappointment to all of us if we couldn't vote and stand in the local elections. But also, I would like to make sure that we don't forget about those EU nationals who have not yet stayed or lived in the UK for over 5 years. I think the key question and the key element now is for all those many people who have been in the UK less than 5 years, as well as those seasonal workers, people who only come to UK quite regularly, but maybe for a few summer months, and the effect that those negotiations and agreements and the whole Brexit is going to have on their lives, on their families, and through this on our local economies.
Dziękuję serdecznie. Czy jeszcze jakieś komentarze, pytania?
Very much indeed. Any other comments, interventions, questions? Would anyone like to comment on anything? If not, I'd like to thank you wholeheartedly for being with us. As I said, most likely in mid-October our text will be ready. We'll definitely send it to you. But visit our website regularly, and definitely this is just the first step. We will be studying the impact of Brexit on budget negotiations and the economic relations of the region with the UK. We heard today that the economy is the field that will be heavily impacted and will be facing many challenges. So we would like to look at it from the economic perspective. Thank you very much for being with us. I'd like to thank the panelists, our colleagues from the Institute. I'd like to thank the interpreters who are not visible but audible. And I would like to invite you to subsequent events organized by the Institute. Thank you very much indeed.